cool. All right, sir. So thank you for emailing me and bringing up this subject because the story I did in Amador I loved, and I think it did them a lot of good exposure too, according to them. So yeah, so just to expand on that subject, so in your industry, well, first off, let me just start off by asking you, what you do and what your industry is and all that.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Paul Towers. I'm the executive director of CAF. We're the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. And so we represent primarily small and mid-sized farmers all across California. We are founded in the Sacramento region, and so that's where most of our presence is. But we work with lots of particularly small fruit and vegetable growers, kind of the folks you see when you go to the farmers market. That's the folks we support, both helping them actually grow the food, how to produce it, how to sell the food, and then kind of when all else fails, making sure their voice gets heard in Sacramento or DC.
And so lately, what has been impacting y'all the most? And specifically, what kind of problems have you been running into lately?
Yeah. Well, the thing with small farmers is it's a tough business, right? We're still losing about 4 farms per day here in California on average. And that's, for a variety of reasons. It's very hard to operate a small farm in the state. There are lots of rules and requirements, but often the price that a farmer gets paid for the thing they grow, that delicious ripe peach, for example, this time of year, it's really hard to earn enough from that peach to actually cover the true cost of production. And so that's what we see for most farmers. It's just hard to get by. A vast majority of farmers, particularly small farmers, are operating in the red. Most are operating at less than $100,000 gross a year, most net negative. So they're just really struggling to get by in terms of actually running farm operations, which is why we see those really scary numbers about farm loss in the state each year. And so when we talk to our small producers, we actually do a big survey each year. We ask, what are the things that matter most to you? And one of the things that farmers said is really has been an exceptional kind of safety net for them has been what's called the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program. And this program actually buys produce from local farmers and then delivers it to local food banks. Unfortunately, that program was terminated this past year, and the funding for it runs out later this year. And so farmers are quite concerned that this program that's allowed them to provide much needed food to food banks and hungry families in their communities and pay them an actual fair price will disappear. And so that's really what's making a lot of farmers that we work with that have really built their businesses around this stability of being able to provide that food to their families, to their communities, is going to disappear in a few months.
And we're talking months too. That timeline is startling.
That's right. So the state of California is currently considering some funding, some resources, and really just the next few weeks as the legislature and the governor debate whether or not there's enough money in the state budget to actually pay farmers and food banks to actually grow this food for families. And that will determine whether or not this program will actually continue in the next year and beyond.
So so Newsom just released his May revised budget. Do you know,
Right.
within his plan right there, the specifics when it comes to agriculture and to farmers?
Yeah, unfortunately, the proposed budget by the governor was pretty sparing or sparse in terms of the actual dollars that would go to farmers and families. There was a modest investment in some baseline funding to keep food banks afloat, but not enough to actually pay farmers and communities to provide the much needed food that we've been seeing for the last few years and is expected to grow in the coming months as other programs disappear at the state and federal level.
What do you think that says? Like the fact that we're not putting enough money aside for, agriculture in the state, which again, it runs on on farmers. Like we are the fruit and breadbasket of the world.
Yeah, it's really disappointing to see the lack of investments in farmers, particularly, small farmers. We have some 67,000 or so farmers here in California. Again, we're losing them at an alarming rate. And, we should have learned, I think, from the pandemic, and we've learned from natural disasters, is we need to invest in our local farmers and our local food systems so we can stay healthy and resilient in the face of disaster. So we need to make those kinds of investments. And I think what, the governor is sending with his proposed budget is smaller farmers don't matter. It doesn't matter to invest in local food systems and communities. Um, we need to see those investments to keep our farms, our communities afloat. So
Absolutely.
we're calling on the governor and the legislature to really step up and provide that kind of support.
Well, he's on his way out. So, I mean, what do you hope for the incoming governor here?
We hope any governor will take the needs of farmers and families really seriously. We are a state that is still the largest producer of fruits and nuts and vegetables in the entire country, and they drive the economy, including much of the economy of the Sacramento region and San Joaquin Valley. And so we really need to provide the kind of support to keep these farm businesses and all the adjacent industries afloat. And so we're calling on this governor and any future governor to really step up and provide that support for farming families and agricultural communities.
And you listed a couple of challenges that are
Yeah.
currently in their way right here. So, we know, again, regulations have to be at an all-time high. I know that's one of the most, because when I was talking to people in Amador County, they were just like, yeah, all these state regulations and stuff that we have to pay for is some of the most expensive in the country. I think he was telling me in Napa, it was a crazy number. They have to pay, I think he said $1,700 an acre, just for regulations and stuff. So I'm sure for farmers, especially a small farmer, numbers like that, it's like, where do I get that money from?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's important to remember that small farmers are operating on really thin margins. You think about how many apples or pounds of apples or pears or heads of lettuce or broccoli you need to sell just to cover the costs of your daily operations. Think about your energy costs. Running a fuel if you're running a diesel tractor. Think about being able to power your irrigation system and build an extensive irrigation system, the costs of water and pumping. Just add all of these costs up, and I think you can begin to understand why operating a farm business can be so challenging. And then what I think really gets to a lot of the producers that we work with is that the amount of paperwork that they need to fill out just to maintain and sustain their operation. And so that's a really costly burden. Many of our producers are working 16-hour days already just to grow the food, sometimes get it to market, get it to a local distribution point. That's all the time they have. And then they have to go home and try and fill out the paperwork. Maybe if they're lucky, try and fill out a grant application to try and cover up some costs that they've for their operation. But really that's just it. Just not enough hours in the day to be able to run that operation and then add all those costs when you think about actually maintaining it. And what California can and should do is actually make it easier to farm. Farmers are land stewards, right? They're sustaining the land, they're sequestering carbon, they're making sure that there's water retention in our soil to protect us against disasters like floods and fires and droughts. And then, of course, they're providing food that we all like to eat at our tables. And so that's the real challenge that we see for farmers is that they're actually providing huge benefits, huge services for our communities, and yet there's really very little recognition of what they're providing to our communities.
And then the food banks. I mean, gosh, they've been through it just within the last year, and it's a trickle down thing because if the problems start there in the field, then it's going to end up there at the table and in families' pantries, right?
Yeah, that's right. We see that the challenges with farmers themselves being able to sustain themselves and their families, and if they're unable to do that, then how can they provide food to local food banks? So we really see this cascading effect of challenges on the farm all the way downstream into communities and food banks. What's really exceptional about this local food purchase assistance program, or what's sometimes called Farms Together, is it pays farmers a direct flat rate for producing that food. Can bring it to the local food bank, say Sacramento Food Bank, or Food Emergency Food Bank in San Joaquin in Stockton. That food actually reaches families directly, and farmers can go back to growing the food in the field. So it's a very efficient system, paid fairly, grow the food, deliver it directly to the families. But we're at this precipice of it getting a lot worse for everyone. And so, the expectation is about 600,000 people in California are about to lose their food benefits, what's called, SNAP or CalFresh, CBT. When they lose those benefits, people will stop being able to use those dollars at grocery stores, which in many cases would have purchased fruits and vegetables from farmers through grocery stores. And now they're going to have to go to food banks. And so there will be less money moving through grocery stores to farmers, more demand at food banks, and less food available at food banks. And so really it's hitting multiple points where farmers and families are really being impacted on all fronts.
This sounds like a horrible vicious cycle that's about to happen. It almost sounds like, I mean, God forbid, but we could be seeing, famine start to break out in certain, especially in rural communities that don't have access at the ready when it comes to food. There's plenty of food deserts here, just in the city.
That's right. What we see is we already have significant demand at local food banks and pantries. Our current emergency food system is being stretched, and will be without additional support and investment. And we see that happening in urban areas. We see it happening in rural communities. What's unique about a program that rewards and pays farmers directly for growing food is those dollars end up back in rural communities that are often underserved. They also then make sure that food is produced, serves both rural and urban communities. And really, we see this, multiple front win where we're growing food, recirculating dollars back in economies to try and bolster them and make them stronger in times of need, and making sure the food reaches the right people. So, that's what's so unique and about this innovative farm to family food box program. We learned to build it in the wake of the pandemic. We actually built this program with, bipartisan support, with both the Trump and Biden administration, and, looking to make sure that we can sustain this kind of program into the future, because it's needed.
It sounds critical at this point. And is there a way that people, when they're watching the story and they're saying, "Oh my God, what can we do?" Well, let's answer that question. What can we do as people who are in the community and they care about it, they care about our future, and they're scared of this getting out of hand? What can people do to help the situation? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think folks can let their elected representatives know how important programs like this are at the state and federal level. There are opportunities to invest in the kinds of programs that purchase, from farmers and deliver to food banks. So at the very least, letting your voice be heard with your elected representatives at all levels. And then in addition, providing support to your food banks so that they have the resources to go out and purchase. Many food banks we talk to would love to have the resources themselves to purchase directly from local farmers, but they just don't have those resources. So, contact your local food bank, figure out how you can provide them those flexible dollars, so they can go out and actually make purchases from local farmers. Some of the best partnerships that we've built in the last couple of years have been around food banks that say, hey, we serve a specific community, and they have this real interest in this type of food. And so they actually reach out to the farmer and say, hey, could you grow more of that? We work with Southeast Asian communities that say, hey, we really like bitter melon or eggplant. That's our dietary preference. Could you grow that for us? And so we work with a farmer that grows that kind of food already, that kind of produce, and they grow more of it. And then we are able to deliver it to the food bank. Another case, we grew corn and made the masa and made tortillas for the community that needed it from that farmer. And so it's really all about providing, food with dignity, culturally appropriate food that the communities that want it, and actually working with, farmers to grow it in the ways that are, as sustainable as possible for that region.
Um, Do you have a story from a farmer that you've heard that, you thought was super impactful and people should know about what they're going through just based on their own experience and how it's kind of representative of what is currently going on for a lot of small farmers here?
Yeah, I just talked to a farmer a week ago here in the Sacramento region who has been hit by multiple natural disasters. They were hit by storms a couple years ago when there were some big storms. They then had a problem with their well because they're on groundwater and that broke, and so they had trouble irrigating their crops. But they were able to kind of get through it all and be able to continue to grow some really exceptional, tomatoes and strawberries and other delicious vegetables and sell those at local markets. But as they've been able to grow that business and had a consistent market, a consistent ability to deliver some of that food to the food bank, that contract has been cut, right? And so they can no longer provide that food to the food bank. And so they're looking, they're looking to me, they're looking to others to say, hey, where could I possibly, what could I do with this produce? Where could I actually sell it so that I can actually, sustain and maintain my business? I've been able to get through all of these other forms of disaster, but what can I do to actually be able to sustain and maintain? And I think that's the story we hear from a lot of farmers in the Sacramento region and in the northern San Joaquin Valley in particular is, hey, we want to grow food. We want to keep growing and we want to even grow at a bigger scale if we can. But we need a place to provide that food and we need to be paid for it. Otherwise, we can't run a small business on nothing.
Yeah, there's like so much talk in, investing in America and everything being American made and things like that. But you continuously see cheap imports coming in. And, again, it's just that things haven't been made easier, right? For people in this industry, which is like, it's discouraging, but you also have to keep in mind that I think it's one industry also that it can't go away, right? I mean, we have to have it.
That's right. Yeah, I think, ultimately, what will happen, I think, like in some industries, is it's the little operators get pushed out, right? The smallest businesses get pushed out. Our community businesses get pushed out if we don't provide the right kinds of support or systems in place to allow them continue to operate. So it's really, I think, it's a moment for us in California and in this country. Do we want small farmers to succeed, or do we only want room for truly large investment operations and international operations? And that's a choice we can make as a country. I for one believe we should be supporting small, diverse businesses. It makes us more resilient in the face of disaster. It also means we get some of the most delicious local, nutritious produce possible. And I think that's the kind of thing that I think more Californians want to see, more of our communities want to see, is that choice, that access, and that stability in the face of potential disaster. And so if we want that collectively, we have to provide the right kind of support to make it happen. We can treat it like a utility, like we do for other things, energy and water. Food is like those things. And so if we want it to be the kind of strong utility, the strong benefit for our communities, then we have to be able to put the right kinds of rails in place to see it succeed.